let's get started. And we're going to start with the new generation of Olympian gods. We finished the originals, the sons and daughters of Cronus. Now we're going to get into their sons and daughters and nieces and nephews. And we're going to start with three right off the bat. We're going to cover the two sons of Zeus and Hera, Ares and Hephaestus, and then also Aphrodite. Now, Zeus had lots and lots and lots of kids, but the two that he had with Hera were Ares and Hephaestus. Ares was one of the Greek gods of war. He was the god of violent, bloody, mindless war. He was violence incarnate. Picture every stereotype of a high school jock from teen movies and add actual bloodshed and like spears and swords. That's Ares for you. Ares is basically a bully and a jerk, and not really well liked, except by a couple of exceptions that we'll get to in a minute. And he's just kind of a bad guy to be around. Not someone you want to invite to the party because, bloodshed. And Ares, when he travels around, he travels with a sidekick, a companion, a goddess named Eris. Now, I want to be clear. There's Ares, the god of war, and there's Eris, the goddess of discord, strife, argument. And Ares will drive his chariot through a bloody battlefield, swinging right and left with the sword. Meanwhile, Eris rides along with him, throwing her apples of strife, her apples of discord behind her and aside as she goes, basically causing fights to break out wherever she tosses these apples. Now, Eris is a fairly minor goddess. However, she's going to play a very, very major role in a very, very major war called the Trojan War, which we'll get to later, but not tonight. That's a whole session all by itself. So you have Ares, killer jock. And then you have his brother, Hephaestus, who is one of my three favorite Olympian gods. For the record, it's Hephaestus, Athena, and Hermes. Those are my three favorites. And part of the reason why they're my favorites is they kind of serve a purpose. I mean, every god has their purpose. Demeter makes crops grow. Hestia watches over the home. Zeus makes the big decisions and spends too much time chasing women. Everyone has their roles. But those three really seem to do something useful. They do something productive. In Hephaestus' case, he is the god of smiths. He is the god of makers. He is sort of like the new version of the three Cyclopes. Now, rewinding back to the first story, there were the three Cyclopes. Singular, Cyclops. Plural, Cyclopes. And there's two different versions of Cyclops in Greek myth. There's the sort of original three who are brilliant makers themselves, brilliant smiths themselves. And then there are these sort of bestial, more monster-like Cyclops that show up later on in Greek myth. But those original three, the ones who made the lightning bolts, the ones who forged the Aegis, who made the trident for Poseidon, those three end up becoming Hephaestus's assistants, so to speak. And they set up shop inside of various mountains. And the flames from their forges, the flames from their furnaces, as they and Hephaestus go about their work forging things, sometimes shoot up all the way through the tops of the mountains and into the sky. And those would be what we call volcanoes. Now, Hephaestus had a couple things that set him aside. One is that he's really kind of ugly. Now, I don't mean he like hideously, disgustingly ugly, but he's sort of plain looking. And if you're the ordinary looking guy in a room full of supermodels, you're going to end up looking pretty ugly in comparison. So Hephaestus is known to be a little bit ugly. He's also covered in dirt and soot and sweat from the forges. So, yeah, he's not the most attractive of the Olympians. And there's something else that sets him apart from the Olympians. He is the only Olympian that's not physically perfect all around. And it's not just that he's not pretty enough. There's another distinguishing physical characteristic to him that we're about to get to. Now, if I didn't mention before, he is a mama's boy. Hephaestus loved his mother Hera, and he always took her side in any argument that she had with Zeus. And there were a bunch of arguments that she had with Zeus. And it irritated Zeus that his son would take his wife's side over his, but he dealt with it, and, he'd yell at Hephaestus and blah, blah, blah. Until one time, Hera and Zeus were having a horrible row. I mean, they were shaking the walls of Mount Olympus. And Hephaestus stepped in between the two of them. And he looked his father in the eye and he said, "You leave my mother alone and you don't talk to her like that. Back off, Zeus." And that's when Zeus snapped. And he reached down and he grabbed his son by the ankles. And he hauled him into the air. And he twirled Hephaestus over his head by his ankles and launched him off of Mount Olympus. Gone. It took days before Hephaestus hit the ground. And when he hit the ground, the legs that were already damaged from Zeus twirling him by them shattered. All the bones in his legs just broke. Now he's an Olympian. He's an immortal. So he survived the fall from Mount Olympus, the literal fall from Mount Olympus. But his legs were just broken. And so he dragged himself, hand over hand, back to Mount Olympus. And then he crawled, dragging himself up the side of Mount Olympus and into the palace. And his legs couldn't support his weight at all. They were just smashed. And so he dragged himself down the halls of Mount Olympus until he got to his workshop there. And the first thing he did was get to work making himself a set of leg braces to hold his broken and shattered legs together. So now he could at least stand at the forge. The second thing he made were two companions to work with him in the forge. They were men made of gold with silver tongues and emeralds for eyes. And they stood at just the right height to him so that their heads were just at his waist level. So they could walk along next to him and he could have one hand on each head to basically be his walking crutches. But when he wasn't in the forge, he still needed to get around, and so he retrofitted the throne in the throne room. He pulled the throne out of the throne room, pulled it into his workshop, and he added wheels to the sides of it, and he enchanted it so it would roll him wherever he wanted to go, which I think is pretty boss. He, 1, survived a literal fall from grace. 2, dragged himself back up home. 3, put his legs back together, although he was still always unstable. And then he invented robots and an electric wheelchair. Pretty impressive. But those legs, they were broken. And he was the only Olympian who had any sort of physical ailment like that. His legs would be broken for the rest of his eternal life, and he'd always have to have those braces holding them together, which isn't much fun. And that's how things went for a long time. And then there was a late addition to Mount Olympus. Not the latest of additions, but there is a goddess that came along. And that would be the goddess Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty. And she technically didn't start out in Mount Olympus. Rewind all the way back to the beginning to the first king of everything, and that would be Uranus, the sky, and his son Cronus standing up to him. And Cronus lashed out and cut him. and Cronus's blood and pieces of him fell down into the sea below. And when they hit the ocean waters, they began to bubble, and they began to foam and churn. And eventually, out of that sea foam rose Aphrodite, whose name actually means sea foam. She rose up out of the foam and then drifted to the shore. And the gods looked down and they saw this amazingly beautiful woman. And they thought, she belongs up here with us, not down there with the humans. And so Aphrodite became the goddess of love and beauty, in particular beauty. And immediately there were problems, because immediately every single god wanted his time with Aphrodite. They all wanted her attention. And there's nothing but arguments and frustration and fights between all the gods as they competed for Aphrodite's attention. And Hera went to Zeus and said, you need to get her a husband. She needs to settle down. As long as she's unattached, we are going to continue to have these problems. You're the king. Get her a husband. And Zeus said, well, now that you mentioned it, I was thinking. And Hera said, no, not you. You're my husband. Get her a different one. So Zeus had to decide who her husband was going to be. And he had a long, hard think about it. And he came to a decision that surprised just about everyone. Couldn't be Hades. He already had Persephone. Poseidon already had a wife or three. Although he would have taken her again. He's like, hey, sea foam, man. Nope. And a lot of people were vying for Aphrodite's attention. But Zeus surprised everyone when he gave her to Hephaestus to be his wife. Hephaestus was more surprised than anyone. He could not believe it. He, out of all the Olympians, he was the one who's going to get this beautiful goddess to be his wife. Everyone else was jealous. And he, for a brief period of time, was the proudest of the gods, because he had Aphrodite as his bride. But there's an important person who was not happy with this setup. And that would be Aphrodite. Aphrodite did not want to marry the ugly, dirty god. Out of all the gods, that's the one she got stuck with. She did have one god in particular that she'd kind of thought would be a good match for her. And that would be Hephaestus' brother, Ares, god of war. Ares was handsome and powerful and, perfect match for her. Nope, she got Hephaestus. And Hephaestus could tell that she wasn't happy having him as her husband. And so he thought, no problem. I'm the god of smiths. I'm the god of makers. I will make her gifts. I will make her the most wonderful gifts anyone's ever heard of. And that will make her love me. And so that's what he did. He made her jewelry. Showered her with jewelry. She wore the jewelry. Still didn't love him. So he made her a chariot pulled by swans. She would ride in the chariot. Still didn't love him. He made her beautiful clothing woven from gold and silver thread, as supple and lightweight as real fabric. Still nothing. And he was just sure. He was just sure that if he could give this beautiful woman a good enough gift, she would finally love him. And so he had a long, hard think. What is he going to do? What does Aphrodite love more than anything else? And you know what Aphrodite loved more than anything else? She loved being beautiful. And so Hephaestus said, that's it. She's already the most beautiful of the goddesses. I will make her even more beautiful. And so he went to work in his workshop. And he made her a girdle, a broad belt, and it was covered in gold and jewels, and it was enchanted, so that whoever wore it would have their beauty increased tenfold. And he gave this gift to Aphrodite. And she put it on, and sure enough, she was even more beautiful. And she loved being even more beautiful. You know what she didn't love? Hephaestus. And now we had a problem. Because now that she was even more beautiful, the whole being married to him was not enough of a discouragement for the other gods. And he was always having to fend off the affections of the other gods who were coming after his wife, because she wasn't doing much fending off herself. And in fact, there was one god that she was doing the opposite, and that would be Ares. Ares and Aphrodite spent a lot of time together. And Hephaestus would walk into a room and they'd be sitting together, giggling and laughing and sitting a little bit too close to each other. And he didn't like it, but what was he going to do about it? Until one day, Helios, god of the sun, came to him and said, "Just so you know, as I cross the sky each day, guess who I'm seeing spending time with Ares?" And to be honest, Hephaestus didn't need him to tell him. He knew. And that was it. He snapped. Because it's bad enough when he kind of figured that Aphrodite and Ares were spending time together, but now he knew. And now there was a witness. And so he set a trap. He went back to his workshop, and he made himself a net. A net of the finest string you ever did see. So thin you couldn't even see it, but stronger than just about anything. And he found out where Ares and Aphrodite were spending their afternoons together. And this time when they went in together, the net swept them up and hung them from the ceiling. And Hephaestus was finally going to get his revenge on his conniving brother and his cheating wife. And he called all the gods and goddesses to come in and laugh at Ares and Aphrodite. And the gods laughed. But you know who they're laughing at? Hephaestus. And they just looked at him and said, "Really? Your wife doesn't even like you and she likes your brother more than you? And you're going to tell everyone about it? Not good, man." And they all laughed at him and they made fun of him. And eventually he let Ares and Aphrodite down. And time passed, and that's basically the way things went. And that is the story, or one of the stories, of Ares and Hephaestus and Aphrodite. But man, I've known this story since I was in the 3rd grade. And I had told the story so many times. But then, one day, and I wish I could remember the first student who thought of this, but I have to tell you, multiple 6th graders through the years have brought this up to me. I get to the part where Hephaestus makes the belt and he gives it to Aphrodite and she gets more beautiful and she still doesn't love him because he's not pretty enough for her. And what multiple students have said to me, and it blew my mind the first time and it still blows my mind every time one of them suggests it. They said, "Why didn't he wear the belt? If the problem is he's not pretty enough for her, put on the belt that makes you pretty." So, apparently Hephaestus, god of smiths, brilliant inventor, isn't as smart as your average 6th grader. Not much of a surprise there. But that's about it. And next time we will do the story of Hermes, god of messengers, tricksters, travelers, and thieves. Have a good night.